If it's selfish, that means it's greedy, right? And what's another word for greedy? It means to covet, right? And so then I was brought into Hebrews 13:5-6, and says, "Let your conduct be without covetousness. Be content with such things as you have, for he himself has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. So we may boldly say, the Lord is my helper. I will not fear. What can man do to me?" And I have a problem with reading certain things, because if I don't understand it, and I thank my 12th grade teacher for this, if I don't understand a word, I need to have a dictionary, right? So to be covetous means it's marked by an inordinate desire for wealth or possessions of another's possession. In my ambition, in my desire, I can, or any of us really, we can go from doing things out of our ambition, doing things out of our just a simple desire, but in making it so selfish, you can get to the point where you start stealing from others. You start either taking from somebody else's blessing, taking from somebody else's things, and just take. To the point where we become like David, who, as he was being disobedient, he basically took somebody else's wife. He sent somebody else to war, so that he can be with his wife, sleep with the wife, and then to not make himself feel guilty out of his own selfishness, to not make himself feel guilty out of the ambition of being with this beautiful woman, Bathsheba, sends the man to his death, basically a suicide mission to die, so that way it can then be said that he wasn't having a relationship with a married woman. If we're going to call it for what it is, right? So you get to the point where in your ambition, if you start off anything, you start off a business doing it the right way, to then you start it off by following the commands that God gives you, by following the things that he wants you to do, to then you get to the point where you're so involved in your own greed, or I can get so involved in my own greed that I then start not caring who I bulldoze over, not caring who I throw to the wayside, not caring who I break out in my path. It's why I have a hard time in conversations sometimes, especially in conversations that tend to get me riled up, because what I want to say at that moment is not, even though like and believe me, God gives me a lot of words for different people and things that I should say and need to say. And I don't, out of the simple fact of, I try and have conversation with people, and then it kind of starts blowing up. And in my anger, my wrath, I'm going to say what I should be saying in a manner that is inappropriate, in a manner that's going to be more destructive than it is of good, in a manner where it's going to blow up. And so my reasoning for wanting to say this thing isn't because I'm being obedient anymore. It becomes out of my own selfish desire to make myself feel better, to make you feel low, because I'm tired of dealing with what you're doing. So then I start more so in that time coveting your destruction versus coveting the blessing that you need to receive, and desiring to give you that blessing of, I was like, Lord, look, the Lord told me to tell you, you need to turn from this, but not versus going, no, you're just being stupid, you need to stop, and and going down the line of like full blown just evil tongues, horribleness. And so in contemplating this, I'm still looking at selfishness, and I'm still looking at, in the fact of coveting and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, well, why is it so bad? Okay. And don't get me wrong, not like questioning like, why is it so bad? Because but no, just like literally, I need an understanding. I would like an understanding, so that way, when I'm a firm believer, you study the word and you study it enough, and you get it to the point where you can actually break it down and understanding it. It actually stays with you, and it stays up here, stays down here. And so I go, and in Exodus it talks of, it says, you shall not covet your neighbor's house, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, nor his male servant, nor his female servant, nor his ox, nor his donkey, nor anything that is your neighbor's. And I look at that, and in my ambition, this is so funny because, and I look at it, in my ambition, I always look at other people and compare myself. And it brings me back to the last passage where we were literally talking about it. It's like, your portion may not be the portion of someone else. God gives you your portion. God gives you your gift. God gives you your spiritual gifts. God gives you the other gifts of the Spirit. God places in you the temperance that you're supposed to have, the temperament that you're supposed to have. He places in you what is for you, not for anybody else. And he doesn't place it for anybody else. So why are you looking at what other people can do? Why are you looking at someone else's ministry? Why are you looking at someone else's music? Why are you so focused on everybody else and so focused on what they're doing and how that compares to you, where you look at yourself like you're here and they're here, when the reality is that we're all right here, and I started talking to my wife about this, and I always have this issue when we put preachers on pedestals. And I say we because we all do it to a certain extent. We put people on pedestals. We put people in these positions where we feel like they can't fall, where they can do no evil, where they can do no nothing, And I always make the comparison of this. The Bible speaks about there's only one shepherd, and that's Jesus Christ, But we look at ourselves as if we are shepherds, It's like the term pastor, okay? If you look at that, the term pastor is basically another word for shepherd. But then I always like this comparison, all right? Because if you look at the Bible, it compares the people to sheep, all right? So if the people are sheep, then I'm only merely a sheepdog, all right? And follow along. The reason why I say this, okay? My job as a preacher, a person's job as a pastor, is to guide everybody who is in the flock to Christ, right? That is our jobs. For anybody in ministry, for anybody in leadership, our goal, and even in the Bible, if you look at the Bible, everything is about leading things back to Christ. The job of the shepherd is to guide you to where you're going, meaning guiding us to the end result, guiding us to heaven, for putting it into the terminology of Christ, right? So my job as the sheepdog, or anybody else, or any other pastor's job as the sheepdog, is to bring the flock to where the shepherd is going. Right? Because me as a preacher, or any pastor, or anybody that teaches, or anybody that brings the word, the job is to bring everybody to Christ, is to bring everybody to where Christ is going. So I'm not the shepherd because I don't know where we're going. I know where we're going because the word tells us, but my job is to follow the shepherd and to bring the flock to follow the shepherd. So instead of being the shepherd who is actually taking us to the destination that we're going, I'm actually following somebody. My job is to follow Christ and to bring you along with me as I follow Christ. And so really, I'm just another animal. If you look at it in the comparison of if the flock is the sheep, if the church is the sheep, right, then I'm simply the sheepdog, or the guard dog, that guards at night through prayer, that guides through the day, as the shepherd takes us along. So really, in between me and the sheep, there's no difference other than I'm just a different classification of animal. It's the same thing with our churches. And it's the same way as if I look at anybody else. There's nobody different from me. We all bleed red. We all bleed blood. If you cut us. The only difference between you and I is that the Lord just took me apart from the flock and said, here, I need you to round them up and bring them to me. Other than that, there's no difference. I'm not better. I'm not any worse. At the end of the day, I can fall and go right back into the flock and become another sheep, and put on the right clothing. And then the Lord will bring somebody else into the position that'll do the job better than I could. This is why it interests me when you have certain people who become scared to develop new leaders. If you're doing the job right, you're going to create other leaders, right? But I can't be so focused on what someone else is doing that I put them above me, when the reality is that they're no different than I am. I can't get to the point where I'm coveting what they have, and in trying to do what they have, I go into the wrong thing, or I start doing the wrong things. Because if I start trying to do what they're doing, when what their portion is not meant for me, when what they're doing is not meant for me, no matter how big or how great or how grand the thing is, if what they're doing is not meant for me, then all I'm going to do is produce wrong fruit. And then I'll have done it out of my own selfish ambition, out of my own greed. And when your desires stem from selfishness, you're more focused on the difference between what you have and what others have, and it becomes more destructive and depressing than it does become a blessing. So if I start doing things out of my selfishness, out of the selfishness of, I want to be like them, I want to have like them, then all I'm doing is creating I'm doing things out of selfish ambition. I'm doing things out of my own pride, out of my own way, out of my own thing, and I'm not doing it the way that it is supposed to be. And so this brings me to more scripture. You gotta love the word when you're reading stuff and literally like you're contemplating things with God and you're like, God, speak to me. God, speak to me. And God is like, well, here's the word then. All right. So then I got taken to Colossians 3:1-4. And it says, if then you were raised with Christ, seek those things which are above where Christ is, sitting on the right hand of God. Set your minds on things above, not on things of the earth. For you died and your life is hidden in Christ with God. For Christ, who is our life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory. And I take this thing, and mind you, it's been used to where people say, don't focus on the things of the earth, focus on God. Well, it's the same thing. If you're focusing on somebody else's ministry, if you're focused on what somebody else is doing, you're focusing on the things of the earth, whether or not it is from heaven or whether or not they're being guided by God. If you're focused on what they are doing and not who they're following, if you're focused on how they do things and not who is causing them to do things. So for me, if I'm focused, and don't get me wrong, I'm gonna use this as simply as an example. Mind you, I love my pastor's teachings. I love how how I've been taught from him and the environment of the church and all that kind of stuff. Okay, but for my Pastor Sergio, if I am focused simply on trying to imitate him and trying to focus on doing like he is doing and being so wrapped up in what he is doing that I forget my relationship with God, then there is an issue. Because then I'm placing him as God versus placing God in his rightful place. And if I'm doing that, if I'm putting him above what God is teaching me, if I'm putting a man above what God is teaching me and what God shows me and what God is doing in my life, and I'm so focused on imitating him versus being who God has made me to be and flushing out what God has in me, then what I'm doing is following an earthly man and not following God.